So I hope you enjoyed your break. What I want to do now, I want to continue a little bit the explanation that we started before the lunch. And then we will go over the technique. And I will stress the parts that are important to notice before you go into practice. And we will also have more time for questions, so if you have any, write them down. Just for general impression, how many of you found the practice of looking into those aggressive memories easy? And how many found it very difficult? How many didn't find anything? Okay. So there's always something to find, right? But you can see that when we start trying to approach those memories, they are not as out there as the times when we lost our power, right? Like we remember losing our power more clearly than using our power over, right? It's like I said, because those moments we tend to hide from ourselves. So I want us to go over now. Yes, this is the right one. Good. So I want us to go over.
Ja, möchtest du mal zu ihr kommen? Zu wem?
Nee, zu Michael.
Zu Michael. Achso, Michael. Ja. You always say Carlos. Can Carlos come to me? Michael.
I didn't say anything about either of them right now. Yes? No, no questions now. Write them down. Write them down. I really want us to. What's
I'm confused.
Yeah.
There's a small problem with the internet. We lost connectivity.
We lost connectivity with the internet?
Yes.
So the onlines are not there. So
I will check the router.
You will check and we will continue, and they can always pick it up after. I can't stop now, okay? So, what we're going to look at together is why do we even want to bother in getting in touch with those memories, and why is it important to work on that, to release that? We're going to look on the outcomes or the effects of aggressive behavior as it happens within us. So, before we even look at the effects, we can probably notice that when a moment of aggression goes through us, when we behave in an aggressive way, but especially the times that we really express it, not so much the times that we think in our inner world bad thoughts about other people, which is the more common aggressive behavior, but the moments that we actually act aggressively outside, intentionally or spontaneously, it doesn't matter. After such bursts of aggression, usually what happens is that our psyche becomes afraid, because we just broke the cultural rule and we have exposed the beast from within. And our psyche gets afraid. So what it does, our self-image goes like, what just happened? That can't be me, because I'm the nice guy, I'm the good guy, I'm not the one that goes out and hurt people. And because it's so shocking to our self-image, we make a very strong promise to ourselves that we are never going to do it again. And we repress this memory very deep inside of us. So it's far more desirable for our psyche to pretend it never happened. So if you look at the memory system, it works in a very interesting way. It would remember continuously the moments of loss of power and tell the story of victimhood to itself, because then the self-image level is still intact. We didn't behave like animals. We were the ones that were attacked. But when it comes to remembering the moments when we were the animals, that's when our memory system becomes very funny. And no, don't remember that happening. So that's what happens underneath the radar. We put it away. And I don't know, when you went over those memories of aggression, did you feel that when you were remembering them, that there was some part of you that really told itself, it couldn't have been me. It's not the usual me. It's something else. And that's what we call, in this specific context, disassociation. So we disassociate our regular sense of self, our regular sense of identity, from that aggressor. And the aggressor becomes something external. And it can become so, how to say, hilarious in some way, that we, the nice guy, the self-image, are the victims of that external aggressor that are not us. So that external aggressor, which is not me, took over me. It attacked me, the nice guy. And because of that, momentarily I stopped being nice and I became overpowered by that thing. And all this externalization is a very problematic thing we do. Why? Because remember, all those inner ways we try to maintain, through them we try to maintain the false layer of subconscious. The victim consciousness is holding us back. It creates a continuous weakness in our system, and we will never be able to break free. So this kind of externalization, or when we put things like that, this is not me, what it does, it even represses even deeper the memory. And then it just gets out of our memory system. It's just buried somewhere in the deep unconscious. That's why that layer is one of the deepest ones that are harder to approach. It's just not something we want to do. Now remember, we spoke last time about this process of concealment. First it was compensation, vengeance, revenge, and then concealment. Concealment is what we do all the time in this type of cases. We conceal from ourselves, we hide from ourselves the fact it was us who were the aggressors, not just some part of us which is not really us. And the more effective we are with our concealment, the more we forget the story, the more we tell it in the wrong way. And then those two worlds are being created. Like we said, the false subconscious, the true subconscious. And the true subconscious becomes inaccessible, or really, really not part of who we are. But look at that. That part that we are not considering part of ourselves is the part that has all the power. Right? The part that we consider ourselves, which is the nice self-image, is the part in us that is harmless. It is not dangerous. It cannot harm anything, and it doesn't get much power. It has average level of power, and most of the time it gets to be the weaker one. So all this reservoir of energy, of our real self as part of this universe, as this outburst of creation, is being repressed. We have no access to that. And that's very harmful. So the real story is the other way around. So if we say to ourselves, it wasn't me, it was as if I was possessed. Some bad spirit came over me and made me do it, okay? The reality is the other way around. We were more present than even in you know how in the traumatic moments we ask what was the level of your presence, right? And we see that the level of presence was very low. In the moment of losing our power, our level of presence go down. But in the moment of aggressive act, our level of presence is heightened. It's not the level of presence from the expanded point of view, of course, because if that was the case, we couldn't be aggressive. But it is much more present. So when we tell the story, I wasn't there, something just took over me, that's a lie. It's the way we lie to ourselves and conceal the truth from ourselves, that we have this aggressive part. All of us. So for us as instructors, it's important to understand that when a person tells a story that way, we already know that we will have to help him reach the point where he can honestly engage with his aggressive behavior. Honestly and without fear. Because the reason we tell that story, the reason we externalize this part or we just push it away is because we are so afraid of the implications of being aggressive. Now, partly it's a problem. It's a cultural problem because as a culture we don't know how to deal in the right way with this power. So we have all this morality around it, right? So we judge all the people in power. We judge them and we have moral judgment on them. But inside of us, we wish it was us. So it's all very twisted and distorted in our society, in our culture. The whole story of power is very problematic. So it's our job to bring it into a healthy environment, within and without. And that's why my teacher, who developed this entire approach, this parapsychology, he always said that he really liked it when what Nietzsche says, that it's better to be a bad person and have the access to your power, to your real energy, to your life force, because at least with that you can work, this you can transform, than to be a good person that he's completely not in touch with his power. Because that good person is just a lie. Of course, when we work with expansion, and that's the beauty of expansion, when we go into the mental spiritual fields, we go beyond these concepts, good and bad and all that. We get in touch with states of consciousness which transcend all those concepts and see that the good as the opposite for the bad is not really good, right? It's only a relative term that is just how much aggression do I allow myself to express. It's not the real good. It's not the real presence. It's not the real compassion. It's not the real connection to the heart. So being good as we think of ourselves is not such a great deal. Okay, and that's what I'm saying. I hope to make us all really be very enthusiastic about getting in touch with our aggressors within. because that's where we really start to evolve. Okay, Carlos is not here, so he cannot work with. Do you know how to do that? So I'm looking for condemnation and justification. So let's go forward. And one more. Yes. Okay, thank you. Is that getting solved?
No.
It's not?
No. But you need to continue.
No, we just did it.
Okay.
So call back. Yeah, that one. So condemnation and justification are very important strategies that we employ in order to distance the act of aggression from ourselves and push it further into the subconscious. And that's why you're going to see when we're going to work with the technique, it also refers to these two strategies. So condemnation, what does that mean? So it means that I did something aggressive, but then of course that momentary loss of presence was over, and then I came back to my senses. My normal state of self-image came back to the front, and it goes like, what did I do? And then we start to condemn ourselves. We start to judge ourselves and to think how bad we are. We deserve a punishment, and we need to be cursed forever. And we believe that when we condemn ourselves, that's a way to be forgiven. That's a good way to deal with the aggressive action. However, it's not. Okay? Because what it is just a superficial morality conscience. It's not real regret. It's just the fear of being judged culturally and the fear of acknowledging ourselves as aggressors. And it's not really dealing with the moment of aggression. It's not a real good way to deal with it. So I remember when I first did my first hidden memory when I was guided. I wasn't ready for that. And it's not that we were aiming towards that, but that's what came up. The first ever hidden memory I did, I remembered myself to be a very bad aggressor who did very terrible things, unfortunately. And as I was going through the memory, it took me into his state of mind. And while I was in his state of mind during the aggressive behavior, I felt great. I felt wonderful. I felt intoxicated with the power. And I didn't have even one notion that I'm doing something wrong, even though in that memory I was a high church person. So the whole concept of sin did not enter my head in that time. I was enjoying myself tremendously while I was doing something really terrible. Like a psychopath, just like that. And even while I was telling the story, I was so deeply in the memory that the mind of Tamar, who would be normally there to observe and have a dialogue with this memory and say, oh my God, that's so terrible. It was suspended. I didn't have it. I was just in the memory, and that felt great. I had no idea I was doing something wrong. And then when expansion came, what happens in expansion is that the first thing that happens through expansion is that we start to get reconnected to ourselves. And when the moment came that me as that person became aware of what he was actually doing, when the cultural level sank in, I became so self-condemning. There was no way to move me from there. Like, there was like, I cannot be forgiven. It can never be forgiven. It's so bad. I was really in a trip of self-condemnation. It was very hard to move me from there. I didn't want to expand anymore. I didn't want to be forgiven. I thought I deserved to be punished forever. That was the deal. And it took me a while to understand that that layer of self-condemnation is not the solution. It's just one station I need to go beyond, because it's not really going to resolve the aggressive memory. It's only going to repress it, because now I have condemned myself and I cannot identify anymore with the aggressor in me. Now I have to be the one that needs to be sorry for themselves. So all this condemnation is just a diversion, eventually. So if you or your clients go into such a state, and it can happen during a technique, be patient, because it sometimes have to happen. But then what my instructor, who was my teacher and the one who developed this beautiful method, at some point he told me, well, let's try to expand again. Just let's see what happens if we expand again. I don't know how he manipulated me to do that, but he did. He's really good in his work. And I said, okay, because in my heart I said, well, whatever we do, I will never be forgiven, so it's okay. I don't care. But then he took me to that state where I couldn't identify anymore with this vibration. In the state that he took me in, everything was forgiven. There was no question of forgiveness. It was just obvious that it's not about being forgiven or not being forgiven. This is not the point. The point is evolution. The point is learning. So all this self-condemnation drama that I was wasting our time for half an hour on, or however long, was not necessary. So if your client gets stuck somewhere in self-condemnation, just gently suggest, maybe it's time to expand one more time, because in a different state of mind, this self-condemnation will dissolve. And there are types, there are types of people who immediately go into this guilt, into blaming themselves, into making themselves the victims of themselves. And there are the types to do the other thing, the justification. Okay? So justification is just another form, again, of missing the point. So when we justify ourselves, we had no other choice, I was pushed into doing it, whatever the excuse we tell ourselves is, what we actually do, we continue to be aggressive. We are not ready to take responsibility for that layer in our consciousness, and then we cannot deal with it. And actually, when we tell that story, we tell ourselves we were the victims in the story, we were not the aggressors. So you will see that many times memories that come up for people are somehow always mixed. So there can always you can work with someone on a memory, and it will have both energies. It will have both a moment of loss of power, but also a moment of aggression. And we need to take care of both sides. So one memory can take 2 sessions. One for trauma healing and one for aggressive healing. And the person needs to have sometimes both parts of the process. Because sometimes it's true, sometimes we do find ourselves in situations where we first lost our power, like Ralph was describing before. But then we react in such aggressive way, and that aggressive behavior has its own implications on our psyche. Usually the people who come to me, they come from the victim point of view. And they think the only thing we need to do is just to take care of the loss of power. But then I tell them, yes, but what about what you did? And they say, no, that was my victim behavior. It wasn't aggressive. And that's what we call justification. So when we become very clear and we know how to make this discriminate between these kind of responses, then we can help our clients, the people we work with, to be more honest with themselves. I had one person, I think in the 12 years I'm working with this method, there was one person who did not agree to see that he was just justifying. His self-justification was so strong that he didn't agree to see that in that way he was just protecting himself from realizing his aggressive side. He was just not ready to do that. So if you have people like that, there's no, like, we can't be aggressors, right? We cannot force them in an aggressive manner to realize their aggressive side. It just means that they are not yet ready and they need more time. Anna, can you move it forward? Let's see. One more? Yes. Okay. So let's look at what happens in our being when we behave aggressively. So the first thing that happens is that we get hard. And that may sound a bit similar to trauma, right? In trauma we freeze, so we also get a bit stiff, but that's a different kind of hardening. Because what happens in trauma is mostly in the first chakra, and what happens in the aggressive behavior is in the fourth chakra. Like, we have to harden our heart center. We have to really detach emotionally to be able to act aggressively. Like, in order to be able to go beyond the voice of culture and all our self-restraint and behave aggressively, we need something really unique needs to happen in our being. Some kind of inner hardening that is just, and in that moment we just shut down all those alarm mechanisms that try to tell us that we're doing something wrong. We have to shut it down, otherwise we cannot do it. The internet is still down?
Yes.
So it's like a regional problem?
I'm not sure. I have an alternative one.
Okay. So try to, when you look at some of those memories that you just wrote down before, especially the ones that you were acting out in aggressive way, try to remember, try to feel what happened in you to allow such a moment. You had to empower yourself to such a degree in many different ways. It's either we tell ourselves we are right, or we have a right to be that way. We find some way to justify shutting ourselves down, or we just want something. That's it. And we just want to get it. And in that moment, we just lose any need to be considerating or have any feelings towards what's going on around us. Now, on one hand, like I said before, there is a certain release in that moment when we allow these inner energies flow out. That's why I said there is some kind of enjoyment. Even if it's not the sadistic one, which is a little more progressed form of enjoyment, even if it's not in that level, there is some enjoyment just by at last letting go of this repression. And just for once in a while feeling really strong. Letting our strength out. However, because we cannot, like I said before, once we go back to our normal state, our psyche cannot handle it, this enjoyment becomes a source of guilt and shame. So it's also damaging the second chakra. Because in the second chakra we have all the raw energies, the flow of energy, the life force, that if we could let it out in an uninhibited way, then it probably would look very different from the way we live. Like, ask ourselves one day a very simple question. If there were no social taboos, if there was no police, if there was no crime and punishment, if you could just behave like you want, how different would your life look like from the way it looks like today? For many of us, it might look pretty different. Because we just don't allow ourselves to express that energy at all, most of the time. So what could be like at least a moment of enjoyment is tagged later as a source of guilt and shame, which also really hardens the second chakra. So the third chakra becomes even more authoritative, and it says, with its controlling power to the second chakra, never again. You will not come out. And this repression is very, very hard. So it represses the second chakra, it hardens the fourth chakra. Nothing can flow like that. Can go on. Even one more. Yes.
Im Deutschen gibt es so einen Spruch, du kannst alles machen, du darfst dich nur nicht erwischen lassen.
Translate.
Hallo, kannst du übersetzen?
In
German, you have a saying.
Which is, you can do whatever you want, just be aware that you don't get caught.
How many of you live according to this saying? That's how you live? You do whatever you want as long as you don't get caught?
Yeah, I would say that in a certain sense.
Sometimes.
When it comes to family and taboos that come from family, it's like, as long as they don't know, just live, do whatever you want.
So you're saying that in your world, your family is the big brother,
Yeah.
right? That's the big brother in your life. So as long as Big Brother is not seeing what you're doing, you do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Right? To a certain degree, yes.
Yeah.
Interesting, because and it's an interesting angle, because part of our aggressive behavior, especially for instance when we are younger people or when we are teenagers, is part of it is an act of rebellion towards the authority. Yeah, so in the energetic level, you can see it as the second chakra trying to rebel against the third chakra and saying, I've got the power. Okay, but none of those things is in any way remotely close to what we call true inner power. Right? Okay. So doing what we want, unless we get caught, could be a nice external form of power, but not build any kind of real inner power. So, but thank you for sharing that. So, there are similarities, of course, between traumatic moment of loss of power and the traumatic moment of aggression. And one of them is the level of our awareness, of our external awareness. Like we lose our ability to be fully aware of what's going on around us during trauma of losing power. We are also not aware of what's going around us when we are in this aggressive state, because it's a little bit like being in a trip. So also in this aggressive state, we are more concentrated on the way we feel, but less on the emotional side, because we don't feel there. It's more in the sensational level. So we gain some, like I said, some sense of pleasure. And all those tendencies in the psyche during that event will be removed in the session. And you will see and that's a very interesting state of mind when we go into this memory of aggression, that when you're going to ask your partner, or a partner is going to ask you to describe the victim and how the victim looks like, the one you are at that point harming, it will be very hard for you to see the face of the person. And that's part of what allows us to be aggressive. We just don't engage with reality. It's like being in a bubble of your own inner pleasure. So obviously when we work with the memory of aggression, after we expand and go back to the memory, part of it will have to include looking at your victim and actually seeing what goes on in your victim's world when you are doing this act of aggression. So let me look at the time. Okay, let's see. Let's go forward. I'll just say a few more things. One more. One before. Yes. Okay. So when we work on the memory of aggression, the healing process would be to fix the distortion of energy. That false external power that we were possessing during this aggressive behavior, the healing part of it will be to take that raw energy that now is out there, and through expansion, to channel it into a form of new power, which is the real inner power. And that happens in the process of the technique through, first of all, agreeing to reconnect to our emotions. That's the first step we do when we go back after expansion, we go back to the memory. So first of all, we have to take responsibility for our actions. Without condemnation, we don't need to condemn. Condemnation, like I said, is just diversion. But it is about saying, okay, I'm ready to admit that this is what I did. It was wrong. And it's okay to feel really, really sorry. Again, without going into this over self-drama with self-pity, which is completely unnecessary. Just feel really sorry. Have your heart a little broken, because that sense of a broken heart, of deep regret, is a sign of us reconnecting. The heart chakra opens again. And it needs to happen. That's part of the process. So just don't take me completely like that, in the sense that if you don't cry, then it means you're doing something wrong. It's not about crying, but it's about feeling deeply sad. And feeling a sense of regret once you become aware of what you did. But then the second level of healing is realizing that this energy, this source of power that came out, could be of use to us. We don't need to repress it from ourselves anymore. We just understand that that's not the way to work with it. The right way to work with it is to turn it into inner power. And it happens in the session, you will see it. So then what happens, for instance, in moments when you get frustrated, or you get angry, or you get provoked, or you just get whatever, instead of aggressively behaving or responding, you feel that aggression. You're not afraid of it. You're not trying to run away from it. You're not trying to hide it from yourself. But you remember that the right way to work with that energy would be not to express it, not to harm through it anybody, but to harness it for your development, either through expansion. Like nowadays, whenever I get provoked, if something can really make me angry, and some things can make me angry because there are so many things that go wrong in this world that can make me angry. But instead of taking that anger and putting it out there, I use that energy of anger for my transformation. So we have, for instance, ways to work with negative emotions. Transform them, use them. So some of our negative emotions could become consciously our anger and aggression. Right? Because many times when we work on negative emotions, it's our fear, it's our sadness, it's our pain, it's our weakness. But we can also work with negative emotions on our aggression, on our frustration. And actually it's a very beautiful process, because when we go back to the memory and we reconnect to the heart, we realize that it could never have happened if we stayed in touch with the heart. So we start to understand that the heart chakra is such a strong generator of self-empowerment. Like our real power lies in the heart. It's not in the third chakra. That's where real power is. Like they say, all these cliches, love is the strongest power in the world, it's true. But for us to have access to that level of power, we need to agree to feel. Without fear. And you know how it is in this dimension, which is all based on polarities. We can really experience a strong opening of the heart as a result of the contrast, right? So many times when we do this process, because it starts with this fist in the heart gets so hard, otherwise we couldn't do it. Later on, when we expand and come back to the memory, the opening of the heart is so beautiful, because it stands against that closed fist. And many times, that's why I'm saying the process of aggression has far more transformative power, because it uses the real substance of the subconscious. So what I want to do now, before I give you time for questions, I just want to go quickly over the technique. It's very similar to the trauma technique, but it has variations, and it's important to see them together. Carlos, can you give me one of them just for a moment, so I'll refer you all to the right page. Thank you. Just for a moment, I give it back. Okay, so you go to page 49. That's 49 is the English version, and 60, I think 60 is the German. The last one on this booklet. Yes. Thank you. So if you go to the very first paragraph of the technique, you can see that we are instructing our client first to prepare at home a list of 10 memories, like we did today. It's quite necessary, because it prepares the person for this kind of work. Like I said, it's not even rare. It's like never did a person enter my clinic and told me, listen, I did such a bad thing, I need you to help me. Okay? The usual story is something really bad happened to me. Okay? So it won't be the normal case that people will just come with their aggressive memory and ask for treatment. It's just not the usual case. But because we know as instructors that we have to reach that point when we work with people that they will be able to touch their aggressive side, that's why we, at some point when we feel they are ready for it, after some trauma work, some expansion, then we send them home with this guidance. So we have some things to work with. And it also prepares the system to such a process. So you can already see in section 1, in the relaxation process, before we enter the memory, there is already a certain difference. Here we say, allow this event or chain of events to fully be with no judgment, condemnation, or justification. Okay, we already prepared the person not to run away into one of those states. And later, still in section 1, towards the end, we tell the person, please take into account that in this kind of memories, the condemnation or justification may be more intense. But it is exactly our ability to look at the event directly, with no judgment, that holds the potential of a significant change. So this is how we prepare the person for the process. Now we have section 3. The sections I'm not mentioning are just really similar to the trauma. That's why I don't mention them. So here in section 3, towards the end, we tell the person, examine how much you avoided being aware, how much you resisted to feel during the event, and to connect with the actual happening around you. We examine the breathing, and then we say, feel the emotional disconnection, the refusal to feel, that made it possible for you to act in the way you acted during the event. So those things that we are saying are helping the person get in touch with this aggressive mode. And section 4 is very specific to this technique, so we'll go over it. 4 and 5. Section 4. Examine if there were also undercurrent feelings and emotions that during the event you preferred to block. That's a very interesting question, because for most of us, during the aggressive behavior, it's not 100% psychopath state. Okay, there is some level of awareness, some kind of inner voice that is still trying to tell us, you're doing something wrong, you're doing something wrong, okay? And we're just overlooking it, or we're just blocking it, we just don't want to listen to it. But when we go into this technique, we really need to see everything that was taking place during that time. And that's why we're asking if there was anything going on that we preferred to block. And then we continue. Try for a moment to watch yourself from the outside, as if you're able to observe your own figure the way it was during the event. Describe yourself. What do you see? So this is the first time we are actually starting to look at ourselves, to observe ourselves as the aggressors. We start to get in touch with our aggressive side. Then we say, now try to look at yourself from the point of view of the victim. So we are asking the person to try and imagine, how would the victim see you? How would you look from the victim's point of view? That will give us another kind of reflection to what does it look like when we engage in such aggressive behavior. And now comes an important question. Try to estimate. If you could feel everything completely and totally during the event, meaning if you were not disconnected from your emotions, how would have you felt towards your deeds and actions? pay attention, in the brackets guide, insist on what would you feel towards everything you did, and not on what would you do differently. Because what people say, well, if I was connected to my emotions, I wouldn't do that. Which is, of course...
Michael doesn't hear you.
Michael doesn't hear me. Michael, can you hear me now? No. Carlos cannot hear me. Carlos,
Okay.
Michael cannot hear me.
Okay.
I will wait because translation is important.
Number two, I want to show also the trauma technique. We said we call the scene, is it internally or is the other one answered already?
Can't hear you?
With number two,
Yes.
when we ask the question like recall the scene, do we expect an answer or
Of course.
it's not internally?
No, he has to tell you the story. What happened?
Okay, because some of these questions come later also like describe the scene and
So so I'll repeat. Now Michael can hear me? Good. So I'll repeat it. In section 2, we ask the person to tell the event shortly, like in the normal trauma technique. We ask him to examine what was the most extreme intense moment, like in the trauma technique. We focus on that moment. We ask them to breathe into this moment, right, so it can open, and then recall the scene in those moments in as much detail as possible. So this is exactly the same as in the trauma technique, okay? So back to section 4. When we ask the person, if you could feel everything completely and totally, meaning if you could feel the pain of the victim, and if you could feel your own aggression without distortion, how would you have felt towards what you did?
Just a moment, they have to change.
They have to change something, okay. So Michael, you give us a sign when we can continue.
It's okay.
It's okay. The reason we are asking this question is because we want a person to become more and more aware of everything that was going on. Because when we go into this aggressive mode, we repress stuff, we block stuff. But for us to be able to heal this memory, we need to see everything that happened, just like in the trauma. All the underlying, most subtle things that were going on. Later, when you do the practice, if you find this question challenging, tell me, okay? Again, paragraph 5 is again different. Discover how much your will to achieve something blinded you and enabled you to act at the expense of another. Examine, what was it exactly that you were trying to achieve? It's an important question because it connects us to our will to power. And of course, it indicates always that we don't have the power. If we had the power, we wouldn't do it. Simple, like you said before. Feel the sense of the aggressor as it was revealed through you at that time. Try to describe it and to explain what hides behind this sense. So these questions in paragraph 4 and 5, they really try to connect us to the aggressor within. Because like I said, sometimes we will not think of that as aggressors because of the self-justification. So it's really we are putting this mirror in front of the person's eyes. Section 6 and section 7 are the same. And section 8 has a little change in its in the way it is articulated. What was the belief? It's similar, but here is a change. What was the belief that made it hard for you to meet directly and with complete awareness the event at that time? And it's an interesting question because in this case the belief will be the way we justify being aggressive.
Which number is that?
8. Then section 9 is completely the same. We go over all the conclusions. And now be aware, you remember in the trauma technique I told you we need to have like a good number of conclusions to make sure we are letting go of all the important imprints. In the case of aggressor, there will be less conclusions. It's not so complex because it's not the same as in the moment of weakness that we reach all these unconscious conclusions and we have all those ideas. In the state of aggressor, we don't think so much. So we have less, I would say less mental conclusions, but there will be some. It can really happen already at this point, at section 9, when we ask for conclusions, that the person will already say, I will never use my power again. And then it's the same, we expand until we reach a state that we feel is deeply rooted in the third field, in the mental spiritual field, state of freedom, of joy, of connectedness, of peace. And while you do the expansion, like I said before, become prepared that some of the expansion will have to go through negative emotions like regret, like sorrow, like pain, before it reaches the states of positive states. And if the person that you work with finds it very hard emotionally to cope with the fact that's what happened and has the tendency towards self-blame, and it will manifest during the expansions, there will be, a lot of negative states, then make sure that you take them really to the right place, not too far, like I said, but well enough established, because when they go back to the memory, what might happen to them is what happened to me in that first session, that I will not be able to go beyond self-condemnation. So we need a good, stable, positive state in the third field. And then, section 17. Similar to trauma, we say from this expanded state we will go again through this event step by step. And here is where it's different. But this time, agree to meet it fully, including everything that you pushed away from your awareness at that time. So in the case of aggression, when we go back to the memory from the expanded state, it's so we can eventually turn that distorted external power into a true inner power. But in order for us to do that, we need to be ready to face everything without fear. Then we have section 18, which has some different variation. So it starts by agree to connect, to feel, and to be aware of the consequences of your actions. Let that expanded state penetrate those moments. Become fully aware of everything that is taking place. So now we are taking the person back to the same moment when he's behaving aggressively. We are not changing the reality. We go back to the same memory of aggression, only this time the person experiences it through his expanded consciousness. And it's a very important process, and it's a very interesting one to go through, because when we go back to this aggressive memory from the expanded state, of course it's even hard to imagine that it's possible to do that. And even though our immediate response will be, but that couldn't have happened in this state, we don't do that. We use that state to go through this aggression, so this form of external power could turn into real inner power. Otherwise, we just skip it, and that's not the purpose. And in that sense, I'm saying a person who is willing to go through this process and go through all those instructions, don't disconnect, resist the indifference, stay fully present, agree to feel and sense everything, agree to meet the consequences of your actions. If a person is ready to do that, there's no need for any more forgiveness. That's already taken full responsibility. This is where you really, you meet your maker from within. That's your judgment day. So we don't need any more than that. This is enough. If a person is willing to do that with his courage, that's it. And therefore, there is a place in section 18, more or less in the middle, I guess. Let's find it together. Yeah, in the middle, where it says, from this state, be aware that there is no longer any need for you to identify with this experience. Prepare yourself for separation from it. Let go of self-judgment and the self-condemnation. Let go of any kind of self-justification. And why do we say that to people? Let me take you back for a moment to the fields, to those subtle fields. Maybe you remember that between the field of the mental emotion, the mental spiritual field, and the cosmic field, there is a very subtle field we call the white light. And if you remember, I told you that when we enter the field of the white light, in that field everything is forgiven. In that field we are loved just as we are. Nobody's having a blacklist, checking all our bad deeds and preparing us to go to hell. This is all a story in the human head. In reality, that doesn't exist. All those projections on a vengeful God that takes record, all those stories of hell and judgment day, this is all bullshit. Okay? It's not true. When we really enter that state of consciousness, it becomes very clear that In reality, nobody wants to punish us. In reality, we are required to grow up, to develop, to take responsibility, to become aware, to conduct divine energy. That's the only thing that makes any difference. And that's why the people that I was interviewing for my masters who had this near-death experience told me the same thing. When they died for some moments and went into the higher state of reality, that's all they met. Absolute, undifferentiated love. Nobody waited for them with the little black notebook and said, on the date you did this, now you have to pay. No, it doesn't work that way. And some people, especially those who come from religious backgrounds, they find it very hard when I read to them this. What do you mean? There's no need to. And if people find it a bit hard when you read to them this sentence, do another expansion. Take them to this white light. Take them there. And when they reach that state, it will not be hard for them anymore to agree. And then, of course, we let go of all the different conclusions, all the imprints that we found before. We remove them one by one, like we did in the trauma session. And then, just like in the trauma session, we have one more expansion. So we can reach the level of integration, which is section 22. And there we have a very interesting and important question. We ask the person, from this state of expanded state, can you see how the initial energy of force has turned in this process into a quality of inner power? Because that's what really happens. And the reason it happens is because we unlocked the block in the third chakra and we opened the heart chakra. Section 23. We are checking for the hidden influence of this event on our present life. And then we ask a very important question. Can you see how, in spite of the emotional detachment and lack of awareness, the impact of your actions penetrated into your body and mind and left a negative imprint in it? Because we have to become aware of the consequences of aggression. Like I said, it imprints us even more than loss of power. Because when we lose the power, we don't need to deal with the whole morality thing. But when we use the power in an excessive way, it's so frightening to us that we retract so much. We'll never do that again. So actually the imprints of an aggression are far worse than losing power. At least with losing power, we have some alternatives, right? We can substitute one form of power for the other, we can compensate, we can do something. Our psyche knows how to help us in a moment of weakness to regain temporarily some level of power again. But in this case, it's the other way around. We take away all the power from ourselves. And then a sentence that Shai put in this technique that I like personally very much. Towards the end of section 23, it says, become aware that the best way to purify oneself from bad deeds is by avoiding them from now on, and at the same time by transforming more and more. So, if you find this sentence resonating for you, like I find it, you can read it. If you don't like it, don't read it. It's not a must. Good. So,
Emma,
yes.
can you repeat the sentence?
So in sentence 23, in section 23, there is a place where we say, become aware that the best way to purify oneself from bad deeds is by avoiding them from now on, and at the same time by transforming more and more. So, before we break into practice, is there any question? Let me start maybe by asking, do you all have a memory you know you want to work on? Or is there someone here who still has no clue? You still don't know?
Yes, I told you about the memory, but it's not a single event, it's more phase, and there are no strong events connected with it. And I really want to work on that issue. So.
Okay, so let's decide that today you are going to give it, and we will talk about it tomorrow morning before we start, and during the day before the next practice, we will already know what will be the one that you work on tomorrow. Okay? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
So now we will work with the longer technique.
Yes, we will work with the longer technique. The other technique that we put in the booklet is a little shorter, like we had a shorter version of the trauma.
Beim Booklet eine Technik davor ist eine etwas kürzere Version.
Achso, das ist die Koordinate und die lange.
Genau, wir sind gerade die lange durchgegangen und wir machen jetzt auch die lange.
So I put both of those versions for you. So if you have a person you want to work with and he doesn't have so much time, or you don't have so much time, the shorter version is still very good. What it doesn't have is the last expansion, which, like I said, sometimes you can skip it if it's too long. So it's not. The shorter version doesn't take out any important thing, and it doesn't include the beginning where we prepare the person with this 10. When we ask them to prepare 10 memories of aggression. Any question? Yes.
I've got a memory which is pretty blurred because it's so long ago. And but I know it was an act of aggression then. And I don't know if it's worth taking it because I don't remember so well, or will this come up in the expansion?
Okay. It's important to start with something you clearly remember. So if you don't have anything right now very clear, so maybe like I said to Stefan, you guide today, and you'll have some more time to figure it out until tomorrow. And if it still doesn't clear by tomorrow, we can talk about it in the break and find something, okay? Because it's important to have very clear memory. or clear enough. It would anyway be blurred because we repress it, okay? But it needs to be clear enough so you can recall the scene. So you can think about it, okay? Yes?
It's a general question because I realized that I have the general problem to have really clear
Memories?
of the event, even with traumas. And I can't find really severe events as well. So maybe there's something hidden. Yeah. And we have the same problems. I have 10 events, but they don't, not really severe.
Yeah.
And when I feel they are, oh, this was not really nice, it's hard to remember the event very clearly.
Yes. Did Michael hear her to translate?
Yes, he's translating.
Okay. So probably in your case, your system works a lot with diversion and concealment. Okay, so it's a little more repressed than other systems. Okay, if you were my client and you told me that, I would say no problem and take you to a hidden memory. And probably it will take you to this life because we don't go to other lives or other memories before we. The psyche would usually bring us back to this life, to memories that we have a little bit repressed or we can't remember them clearly. So there are ways to approach them even when you don't fully remember them. For the sake of this practice, maybe we can talk later. And I'll try to guide you what to choose from the list that you have, even though you feel they are not too severe. Okay? Yes, Sabine?
Yes, I have a memory where I was quite aggressive, but I don't know the root cause. Why? Is this important to know?
No.
Okay.
Like, actually, this is a nice one when you don't remember the root cause, because then the sense of self-justification will be less, right? If you don't have a story to back your aggression and say it's because, it's even better. Okay, anybody else? Yes?
Eine grundsätzliche Frage. Der Punkt der Selbstidentifikation wechselt der im Normalfall bei uns. Also wir können entweder an dem Punkt sein, wo wir sowieso beides sehen, wo wir wissen, wir sind weder das eine noch das andere. Oder wir identifizieren uns abwechselnd mit dem Opfer oder Täter oder Aggressor. Oder ist es so, dass gemäß dieser Power-Psychologie, willst du erst übersetzen?
Vielleicht noch ein bisschen. So, the question is if the self-identification changes at some point, because it could be that we do not identify with the victim perspective and also not with the aggressor perspective, but it could also be that it changes, that sometimes we perceive ourselves as a victim, sometimes as an aggressor.
So you're asking about the sense of self-identity?
Yes. Can we say there is a general point that is for everyone? So for example, I cannot be in the state where I can look, I'm not identified with neither. I can just see I'm this consciousness and then I'm not identified. Anyhow, and there is no problem. Or I can switch to a victim consciousness, or if I'm the doer or aggressor, as it's called here, I'm either. And according to the power psychology, this would be the next question. From what I understand, since our system has the will to power, So is this what you are trying to say, that we usually aren't identified with mainly the aggressor, because this is the will to power?
Okay, let me put some order. Okay, did Michael could he hear her?
No.
He couldn't hear her. Okay, so you're asking about identity. Where is our identity? Is it in the in the victim consciousness, in the aggressor consciousness, or in an observant level, which is neither? That's one question. And the other question is, according to the parapsychology, does it mean that our sense of identity is the aggressor, basically? Okay?
This is what I got.
Yeah, okay. So let's say from the point of view of the subconscious, okay, the second field, okay, the mental emotional field, our real self is the aggressor, is the will to power, okay? What we usually identify ourselves with is the victim. And even if we don't call it the victim, even if it's a little milder than just feeling like a victim, we would still identify ourselves through our self-image with being good or just being okay. So our usual sense of identity will not be one with the aggressor. Okay? That's the normal state. Okay? That's the regular state. Not the healthy one, but the regular one. Later, when we start working on ourselves, okay, the first step into becoming more balanced is to realize that the truth of our psyche is that we are those aggressors. Okay, that's the first step, the first honest step towards healing. Okay, when we are ready to let go of the victim consciousness, which is the false subconscious, and from the self-image of being the good ones. Okay, and then the next step would be to expand into the higher states of consciousness, the other fields, where our sense of identity is not in either. Then when that happens and we start we start building true inner power, then our sense of self-identity will be different. It will be not in the aggressor, not in the victim, none whatsoever. It will be beyond it. It will be something else.
There's one small online question.
Yeah.
We did one once in German. Also Reinhold online fragt, meine Erinnerungen an Aggressionen haben eins gemeinsam. Ich habe sie nie nach außen gerichtet, eher nach innen gewütet. Funktioniert die Expansion dann genauso? So she says, my memories of aggression have one thing in common. I never put them outwardly, but instead kept them inside. Does it make any difference for the expansion?
So so Reinhold, you don't have direct memories of expressing in an aggressive way, like putting it out, but your aggression is more an internal thing. Is that what you mean? Mm-hmm. So if I will wait for you to answer, but I will say, as I said before, there are different types of aggression. And maybe right now, it's hard for you to remember the moments that 100% sure happened, that you also put it outside. There is no way to go through one lifetime without being aggressive externally at least once. Not possible. It is possible, however, not to remember it. Okay? So if it's easier for you now to remember those more inner aggressions, start with that, no problem. It's good enough for the technique. The only thing that will happen when you go through a memory of internal aggression is that the damage is not external. So it's not so much about the victim, because it's not being expressed. So it's more of an internal thing. So for instance, like Christine said before, when she thinks badly of her daughter, because you don't tell her, you stupid cow, there is no victim. There is a victim, it's you. You're harming yourself when you do that, okay? So in that sense, it will not be exactly like this technique means, because it aims towards external expressions of aggression. But if you don't have one, or you don't remember one, that's okay. You can start with your internal memory, but just be aware that it will not so much be about a victim that you have harmed, but it will be more of an internal process. But it's also something we can use the technique for. Okay, I want you to go to practice. Any other? We can just take a short break and then break into couples. It's 10 to 5. We will have until 20 past 6 to practice. And at 20 past 6 we will come back for just a short closure and end the day. Please, in this practice, if you need any help, if you're not completely sure when you instruct that you're doing the right thing or you get stuck in something, please call me, okay? Good.